Discussion. We'll have with us Maria LEPTIN from the European Molecular Biology Organization and Angela Bellia from the National Research Council of Italy's Institute for Archaeological and Monumental Heritage. Maria is a biologist and Angela is a complex musicologist and digital heritage and social sciences person. And I think that we're covering with two people a very large part of the scientific spectrum. Myself, I'm currently a professor of chemical engineering at the University of Lorraine in France. And for those who have not seen the announcement, I am then the future incoming president of Euroscience. So I'm looking forward also to that. So without any further ado, I'd like to give the floor to Carlos. I'm going to sit down in the first row so I can watch him speak. He has about a quarter of an hour, and then we'll move the panelists up to the panel session. So thank you very much, Carlos. We're looking forward to listening to you.
A little bit my life by traveling to Toulouse in the 1990s, and so I keep really good memories of this place. But yesterday I felt there was a fantastic energy in the room, that people were here to really exchange ideas and to think about the future. And that's the future that I want to talk about today. I wanted to talk about what Horizon Europe will be, and what was behind Horizon Europe. What is the story behind Horizon Europe? How did we get to it? I think that when we started thinking about Horizon Europe, we thought that Horizon Europe should be and ought to be something more than science. And the starting point is that I really think that we need to rethink the social contract that we have between the citizens, the governments, and science. And what a best place to talk about the social contract than France, for those that as I myself like Jean-Jacques Rousseau. Jean-Jacques Rousseau said in the social contract that monarchy did not have a natural right to power, that the people had that right, and so only the people are sovereign. Authority, he said, is not just something to be taken. It comes from a social contract agreed by the people. And today we need a new social contract. Science is not about institutions. It's about the people who build those institutions. Science is not carried out by people like me. Science is not carried out by governments. Science is the product of hard work of people like you. And human beings are the true owners of the results of science, what Rousseau said 300 years ago. And that's why we need to redefine the terms of the contract between people, science, and governments. But to redefine that, we have to think what has changed in science. What has been the real change that we have seen? And I think that the first big change about science is connectivity. You know, Napoleon used to say that geography is destiny. It's not anymore in a digital world. A sociologist that I like very much, Parag Khanna, has these statistics, so as he says that in the world we have 500,000 kilometers of borders, of physical borders, but we have 1 million kilometers of internet cables. And as we moved from a world in the 19th century that was vertical integrated, empires that were vertical, to a world in the 20th century that was basically horizontal, made by interdependent cities, we are getting in the 21st century to something very different, a global network. And the game in a global network is very different from the game that you play on a vertical or on a horizontal kind of chess player. you have to think how you get to the top. And getting to the top when you are in a network is not as before. There's a guy who wrote this book called Humans Are Underrated, Geoff Colvin. And in his book, he says something that I think describes the way we have to work today, meaning in politics or meaning in science. And I will quote Geoff Colvin on this. He says, today, competitive advantage is not driven by the resources you control, but those you can access. The path to success no longer lies in clawing your way to the top of the heap, but in nudging your way to the center of the network. And that's what we didn't get yet. We still design our institutions to help people going to the top. We still have institutions that are vertically integrated, but the world doesn't work like that anymore. And also, yes, your scientific institutions have not changed yet. Your universities, a lot of them still work in that paradigm. And that paradigm does not exist anymore. The second change that I want to focus today is a different one. Is a change that really bothers me for my children. The second change is this recent distrust of science. This constant distrust of science that we've seen in the past couple of years. We saw it in the Brexit campaign with the tax on science and experts. We're seeing it now as the government of the most powerful country in the world has not appointed a chief scientific advisor. That is very serious. So the problem with these is not that really people will go into a world of falsehood or that people will go into a world that there's no more facts. I think that this kind of game of confusing what is true and what is not is probably one of the most dangerous games one can play in life. And the other day, I was reading this article in the New York Times about a woman that has been a hero of mine, Hannah Arendt. And in 1967, she was writing exactly about this problem, Imagine the Vision. And she said something that probably we're not saying enough today, because we talk about the distrust of science, we talk about people that come up with facts that are not facts, and all these falsehoods. And Hannah Arendt said, and I quote, "The result of a consistent and total substitution of lies for factual truths is not that the lie will now be accepted as a truth and the truth be defamed as a lie, but that the sense by which we take our bearings in the real world is being destroyed. We are disregarding the distinguishing line between truth and falsehood." So I think that is the danger, is that on the street, sometimes people, they don't care anymore if it's true or false. That distinguished line in between true and false is becoming something that people don't care. I mean, if politics lie, people still vote for them. How crazy is that? If I vote for someone that I know is saying something that is not true, that's because we are beyond somehow repair. And that is a responsibility not just of politicians, it's a responsibility of you, the scientists. So each of these things, growing connectivity and the growing distrust in science, have changed the name of the game. And that's why our social contract for science has to change. But the question is, what will that change look like? And I believe that that change has to be radical. A social contract where citizens and sciences is at the heart of public policies, and where citizens and scientists are also politicians. They are the co-creators of politics. They are the co-creators of policies. And you have to do it, because if you don't, nobody will. A social contract that brings people closer to science, where Europeans feel proud of European science. And I want somehow Horizon Europe to be the cornerstone of this movement. And that's why we have proposed this budget of 100 billion, because I could convince everyone around the table that this was bigger than science, that it was not just about science, that when I was talking about open innovation and open science and global challenges, this was not just about science. Because in the past you've sold yourselves as saying we need money for science. And I say you need money for science because the world depends on the ability of science of changing that world. So let me explain you a little bit of the rationale behind. So when you talk about open science and open innovation, I think these are the two pillars of the basis of that new social contract, where the scientist and the innovator are at the center. In the digital world, the innovator and the scientist are at the heart of policy. So first, we have to boost open access and open data policies. And the message here is very simple. If you receive money from us, you must publish with open access. We cannot continue to allow people to publish where the only way to access the information is to buy it. That's the main right of the taxpayer, is to access information. And I want to thank Robert Jan Smits, which is here today, for pushing us to the edge of that, to tell us that we have to do it with this Plan S. So thank you, Robert, for your great job, and thank you for being such a champion on open access and open data. Second, we must carry on the success of the European Research Council. And that's why we went from 13 billion to almost 17 billion euros. If you look at every line of Horizon Europe, every line, the biggest line is the European Research Council. And I'm very proud of that. Third, we must really radical change when the way that we look at innovation. And that, my friends, has been a big battle of mine, the setup of the European Innovation Council. That's where innovators tell us the route that they want to take, not the other way around. Innovators will be at the heart of the process, as scientists are at the heart of the process of the European Research Council. They will have calls with open and free, without restrictions. Then we will evaluate the person behind the proposal, not just the proposal itself. Then we will bring new project managers, people that come from outside of the Commission, to guide every innovator, to help them in their work. And what I'm saying here is that we want to finance the innovator and not the innovation. And you know, your role, scientist, is very important, because open science will be the resource for the EIC. So much of the radical innovation that you see today comes from basic science. You know, the future of innovation will be very different from the past. It's not going to be about the apps and the digital world. It will be about the very exciting work that scientists are doing. It will be about AI and blockchain and CRISPR-Cas9. And so the EIC and the ERC and the universities will need to work more closely in the future to reinforce each other. And from that, we will get stronger science and innovation. And that brings me to the end of my speech, but to my third pillar, Horizon Europe Program Global Challenges. And in the European Union, we have been very good at defining challenges. I was just with a professor that told me that he is the responsible and is part of the Human Brain Project, and that's one of the examples I give. What a great project, the Human Brain Project, but does my mother know about it, or people on the street know about it? No, because there's no link with the people, because people don't understand what we want to do by mapping the brain. So Mariana Mazzucato has helped us a lot on these, and she has this wording that she says that innovation in science are about speed and direction. And in the world, really the world that we live in, that's exactly that. Missions will provide this direction that we need. The scientists will set up the speed, and people will create the social dynamics. That's what we're talking about. We want to be the first to solve the people's problems. We want the people to be proud of European science. And they often don't even know what we do. And I think that's exactly what we need to think. Let me finish with a story from my friend Bertrand Piccard. Bertrand was the first person to fly around the world in a solar plane, a solar-powered plane called the Solar Impulse. And in the process, he made us very proud as Europeans. He's from Switzerland, not part of the European Union, but a big European country at heart, and he's a big fan of us. And when he started his adventure, two things happened that are a good illustration of the message that I want to convey to you today about the missions. First, a lot of people told him, Bertrand, you're not going to make it. How are you going to design a plane just with batteries, with solar energy? It's going to be too heavy. So we went to the biggest plane manufacturers, and they said, it is impossible, it will be too heavy to fly. But he didn't give up. Because everybody told him no, the ones that were specialists of planes, he went to a friend who was a boat builder, and he asked him to build the plane. And the boat builder did it. And Bertrand, I asked him, but how on hell this boat builder did it if the other guy said no? And he said, because the boat builder didn't know it was impossible. And I think that is exactly where we want with the missions, is to find ways that we do it because we don't even know it's impossible. So the missions will be grasping that impossibility. But the second part of the story is that people told Bertrand, why do you go on the plane? Why do you go on that plane? You can just send it without a pilot. And he knew that that would not have the same effect. Because to build a link between science and people, you need great stories. And great stories need a protagonist. And these protagonists are you in this room. So these stories are the science missions that we're going to create, where you will tell people that you will get and cure Alzheimer or cure some disease, or that you're going to fly for the first time in a commercial plane that is zero carbon, or you have the zero carbon car or the zero carbon city, that a lot of people will feel it's impossible, but you know it's not. But then you have to be the protagonist. So if you are a scientist that thinks that can do your career behind the scenes, you cannot anymore in this world. You have to be the story. Because the story of the Solar Impulse without Bertrand Piccard would not be a story. Because humanity is the center of the story. So, ladies and gentlemen, Jean Monnet used to say, nothing is possible without the citizen, nothing is sustainable without the institutions. The future of science will shift the lines of authority of European science and create a new connection between the government, the individual, and science, just as Rousseau told us. This is the basis for a new social contract. This was what I wanted by the Horizon Europe, was to set up this cornerstone of a new social contract between the citizens, science, and governments. So this is the basis that we will have to communicate, to build that future together, and we need to do this with you, the scientists. We need to do this for the future of science in Europe, and we need this for the future of democracy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Carlos. So I'd now like to ask Maria Leptin and Angela Bellia to come up and join us. Carlos, you join us as well up on the panel. The way this is going to work is I'm going to ask Maria first and then Angela to provide their reactions to what Carlos has just told us. And that will not be very long. I'm giving them a few minutes to do that. And what we're going to do then is we're going to open up the discussion to dialogue with you, those of you who got up early and came to join us here. We have put two microphones, one microphone over there and one microphone over here. And when I give you the signal, after Maria and Angela have told us what they have to say, then we will take your questions. And the questions will be taken by all three panelists. And Carlos then becomes a panelist. And so he can respond to your questions as a panelist, but Maria and Angela can also respond. And it may not be the same answers, huh? So let's go with that. So I'd now like to give the floor to Maria Leptin from the European Molecular Biology Organization and her comments on how she sees Horizon Europe and perhaps her reactions to what Carlos has just said to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'll have to speak more slowly than I had planned because of the terrible acoustics. So I'll be able to say less. It is impossible to respond to everything you said, Commissioner. It was a passionate speech, and of course I agree with everything. But I really want to concentrate my comments today on your former battle cry for open science. And not try and cover the whole range of interesting topics that you brought up, although this is a wonderful opportunity here to discuss things that concern us all. So the concept of open science has become widely embraced by the community, I think, by the scientists out there. But I feel that many questions and uncertainties over its implementation remain to be resolved. But first, let me briefly, for the full disclosure and transparency, tell you a couple of words about EMBO. EMBO is a Europe-wide organization. We fund science through providing postdoctoral fellowships and through providing training, courses, and workshops. We do some science policy, but we also represent the community, because really what we are an academy of the 1,500 leading life science researchers. So it is their concerns, it's the interests of the scientific community that we really promote and defend. And finally, in terms of full disclosure, we actually publish 4 journals, 2 of them open access, 2 of them hybrid. A bad word, I know, and I'm very interested to see how the culture will change. So, but again, we use these journals to promote modern ideas and in the interest of the community. So I want to make 3 points about open science. First of all, we mustn't forget that open science goes beyond open access and even beyond open data. I think to allow a successful implementation of everything that open science means, we need to provide a structural and an ethical framework. So one concerns data and the other concerns the responsible conduct in research. You've alluded to that, to the mistrust in science. We've got to counteract that. And without that, open science will be useless. Then there's the conception that open means for free. And if this is what it's supposed to end up meaning, then we must be aware of the consequences, including many potentially unintended bad consequences. But my view is that we should actually make a strong effort to simply disentangle the concept of open from the concept of money. Good open science will cost money. It will not come for free. And finally, I think we have to have some kind of generally agreed quality control. Let's by all means throw out all that is bad about publishing and get rid of the dirty bathwater, but let's keep the baby. And for me, the baby is high-level expert peer review, which in my view, in spite of some of its weaknesses, remains the best guarantor of careful and expert assessment of quality, which we absolutely need. So I'll elaborate a little more on these issues and then end up with a question to the Commissioner and to you. They may be rhetorical questions, but maybe they can be seen as pleas. So On the open science goes beyond open access. I will not talk further about research integrity. There's a very nice workshop on that issue this afternoon, and I hope it'll be attended by many of you. Data. Let's assume we are in that fairyland that we want to attain where everybody immediately discloses all their publicly funded data. A wonderful aim, and it's great. But there's going to be a huge mass of data, and it's not clear how we will be able to navigate and to sort and to connect them. We'll need new mechanisms, new softwares, new algorithms. Please remember that most of our search functions, which you again alluded to, the connectivity, it's there, but it's about text. And at least in my field, the biological and the medical sciences, many of the stuff that we'll be putting out there is data. Search machines can't find data, so we need new mechanisms. And actually at EMBO, we've been developing platforms for data annotation, for curation, for tagging, and for searching. But there's practically no public money to fund that. So it's essential that we do something about that. And the blindness to this problem is quite surprising. Open does not mean for free. So it's a great opportunity, as we're all aware, but it may end up costing more rather than less, as we've been hoping. And it's really essential to disentangle the issue of unfair costs of publishing from the general goal of openness. They must not be conflated. We have already seen examples that prove that they can be conflated and that they should be kept separate. The predatory journals that offer relatively cheap and fast publication of manuscripts make profits by publishing large numbers of such manuscripts without providing any of the services or the quality assessment or the findability that respected community journals provide. And conversely, highly regarded journals can successfully charge very high publication fees. So they're clearly disconnected. You can be open and bad and cheap, and you can be open and good and expensive. And the whole range in between exists. And we have to be clear what we want and what we choose. Finally, quality control. A simple mandate for openness will not necessarily lead to more reliability, transparency, trustworthiness, unless we take appropriate actions. Right now, some of the assessment is what journals do, and I really do not want to defend journals here. We may find better ways of publishing. But I do believe that the peer-reviewed paper is a very valuable instrument, a paper with a hypothesis, data, and a conclusion that's put out for peer review and discussed. That has to be protected. Many say, well, that can be done by community commenting. Look at TripAdvisor, works extremely well. Yes, we can use TripAdvisor to find a nice restaurant, but if we really want the best, I bet many of you go to your Gourmet Law and your Guide Michelin to find the best. So that's one thing, the quality assessment, but then also the number of people doing it. It's extremely hard work. A good peer review is hard work on the part of academics who do it for free as part of their engagement with science, but also as the professionals who organize this and who do the other steps of curation, of ethics checking, of annotation, etc. So it doesn't come for free. It costs money. So if open science is about sharing with high quality, reliable and evaluated data, the mechanisms that ensure the high quality, reliability and the evaluation need to be in place. Whether we keep the ones we have, which I think we have good ones, or invent new ones, which would also be interesting. And the problem is, of course, that all these items that I've mentioned costs money. Mechanisms, quality, integrity. And if we do not put any of these safeguards in place, I think we may end up with lots of access to open data, but we may find it difficult to find our way through a morass of mediocrity at best, or fraudulent or flawed material at worst. So the question to the Commissioner and to the community is, how do we protect quality, who pays for it, and how much? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maria. So we'll keep that question in our heads, and we're going to give the floor to Angela Bellia, who also has a few minutes to provide her comments on issues that are close to her heart in this particular context. So, Angela.
Good morning, everyone. I would like to thank the organizers of the ESOF 2018 for inviting me to this plenary panel discussion. I am very excited to be here, and I am very proud to have the opportunity to share my experience with so many wonderful researchers. My work concerns a particular area of social sciences and humanities, and involves the archaeoacoustics and digital heritage. I have been an Erasmus student, an Erasmus visiting professor. I am two-time winner of the Marie Skłodowska-Curie Individual Fellowships, and I am currently engaged in preparing my interview for the second step of an ERC Consolidator grant. Fingers crossed. Europe has supported me throughout my research career. Thanks to European funding programs, I have been able to make a strong contribution to the advancement of my research fields, and I have developed new skills through my active membership of the Marie Curie Alumni Association. This global network of researchers is open to any past or present researchers supported by the Marie Skłodowska-Curie actions. And I would like that this program is one of the European Union's flagship initiatives to provide research grants supporting researchers at all stages of their career across all disciplines. I belong to a generation of European researchers excluded from the academic system of their country of birth, not only due to the lack of opportunities for permanent positions, but also due to the rigid, conservative, and sometimes anachronistic hierarchy of academia in some countries. These issues have led to grim work perspectives for many researchers, particularly in Southern and Eastern Europe. The general perception is that these researchers struggle with high levels of job insecurity, impacting more strongly experienced and talented researchers. Furthermore, especially in the social sciences and humanities fields, the number of permanent positions opened each year has decreased substantially at a moment in which research and innovation are our great allies in our ambition to make Europe the world leader in heritage-based innovation. As the Commissioner Carlos Moedas pointed out at the conference for European Year of Cultural Heritage, he emphasized, is a limitless source of innovation where traditions meet with cutting-edge technologies. Thus, the social sciences and humanities can provide not only better integration with scientific, technological, and scientific field, with an emphasis on early collaboration and multidisciplinary work, but also an unmatched contribution to the workings of democratic societies as they try to protect and enhance our democratic principles and structures: tolerance, security, inclusivity, innovation, and solidarity. As the policy working group of the Marie Curie Alumni Association, chaired by Fernanda Bajanca, and the board of the Marie Curie Alumni Association recommended in the statement on Horizon Europe in response to the public consultation on EU funds launched by the European Commission, we believe that the societal long-term investment in science is reflected not just by the amount of money being invested into research projects and researchers' training, obviously, but also by the stable incorporation of researchers. In addition, the MCAA also supports giving researchers suitable interface to the private sector so that they have a broader perspective of career opportunities, understand their value within the knowledge-based economy, and can transition from academic research institutions more seamlessly where roles are not available. The trend of limited long-term career perspectives for researchers will have a long-term impact on European science and society. There have been a few measures taken in Europe to support the career prospect of researchers. Some countries have succeeded in training and marketing PhD researchers, but an EU standardized policy, especially taking into account established and recognized researchers, is lacking. Thus, although there is a great potential, Europe does not fully capitalize on the knowledge that is produced. As the European University Association has stated, despite the structural changes implemented so far, there are still large geographical imbalances in participation in Horizon 2020 with regard to the use of its resources. The problem of geographic imbalances is highly complex and goes beyond north-south, east-west disparities. Many top research actors in the underrepresented areas cannot engage according to their potential, and Europe as a whole loses out on their excellent ideas. The problem of the participation gap must be addressed by Horizon Europe if the European Union is to exploit its full potential. The additional funding provided to Horizon Europe could therefore be used not only to increase the success rates for excellent proposals, but also to considerably widen geographic participation and make a qualitative step forward towards a more cohesive and inclusive European research area. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Angela. There's a short transition here where I'd like you to start thinking carefully about what kind of questions you would like to ask. And then for those of you who would like to ask a question, there are two microphones, one over here and one over there. Please come down, stand before the microphone, and wait until I call you. And while that is being set up, I'd like to ask Carlos if he could address the two questions that the panelists have suggested. One is, how do we deal on a practical basis with this open science agenda? And the other is, how do we deal with the question of human resources? How are we going to help early stage researchers to get into the scientific community on a stable basis? How are we going to help us, how are we going to help ourselves to have a good, positive use of all of our human capital and resources everywhere on the geographical continent of Europe?
Thank you very much. I'll start a little bit by Maria, and I think there's so many interesting points that you raised, and I always will remember my visit to your institution, and one of the points that always sticks to my mind was one of your colleagues telling me about the dark matter of data, right? All these data that you're not able to use. And being myself an engineer, the dark matter concept came quite easily, and I still quote a lot of that. But I think there's two things you talked, Maria. One is about the cost. And when I say that it's free, I want it to be free for the reader, but it's not free. And I know that, and someone has to pay for it. What I think is outrageous today is that in some cases, the reader pays, the university pays, we pay, and everybody pays 4 or 5 times, you know, and it's just outrageous. And I think that the system and the resistance of the publishers, which is understandable, is their line of business, is their business model. It's understandable, but we as the public side, we as the policymakers, we have to push to the other side. And we have to push very, very, very strong. But you have the open access to publications, that's one thing, and then you have the open data, which is another thing. And we have to work in both. But the political guidance was very clear, was we have to change the paradigm. We know that there will be costs, but we have to change the paradigm to a paradigm where the reader doesn't pay. So I think that you raised very important points, because the devil is on the detail. And so you went to the detail there, and we know that we have all that, but my guidance at the political level is we have to sort this out, and we have to push the publishers, and we have to help them also to find new business models, but we really have to do it, and we have to do it very quickly, because then we can lose the boat. It was also you, Maria, at the time, the figures that you have in your institution about the impact of open data economically, on that report that you did, which I think was more than 1 billion euros of impact on the economy, they just talk by itself as in the Human Genome Project and others. So we know that is the way. The difficulty is the journey, and that's where the problem is. And then to Angela, I'm a big believer that really social sciences will make the difference in the innovation of the future, because everything else can be digitized, but you cannot be digitized. Your line of business is humanity. And I think that the more you go into the next phases of innovation, the more you will need social sciences, because they will be the ones that make the difference on the innovators. And we talked a lot about examples at that conference of cultural heritage. But there's one thing that the European Union cannot do, which is to solve the national problems of the policies towards science and education. And I felt that when you said about your generation, I think it's not just in science. I think that the crisis really made a huge damage to a whole age group that went through the crisis and found themselves without opportunities, without jobs, and that is not just in science. I think that it's across the board, and unfortunately is somehow our generation that suffered a lot. I think the European Union policies can help the countries, but we cannot substitute the policies of the countries. And what you said about all these generation that really kind of didn't find jobs, and that is something that as a politician I've seen in different kind of forum that are not just science. So I hope that we help, but we cannot just replace the national governments. I'm afraid it's not part of our business.
Okay, thank you, Carlos. I'd now like to open up to the questions. Now, what I'd like to ask is for each of you to come up to the microphone, state your name and where you're from, and the shortest question possible. So please, first question here.
Thank you. My name is Michalis Tsadzanis. I'm coming from the Austrian Research Promotion Agency. I'm a national contact point in Horizon 2020. My question is addressed to Commissioner Moedas, but I will be interested to see the reaction of the other panelists also. Thank you, Commissioner, for your inspiring words. You will probably, though, agree with me that Horizon 2020 has not been very successful so far in including society or citizens in the projects, with the exception of the Science with and for Society program, probably, which also partly funds ESOF, by the way. But unfortunately, SWAFS has been more or less forgotten in the Horizon Europe proposal of the European Commission. So my question is, where do you see society coming into the debate for the new social contract, and how will Horizon Europe make sure that this time around it will work better?
Okay, Carlos first, and then perhaps Maria and Angela's comments on this.
I think the whole idea of the missions, that is an idea to unite all parts of the program. So if you have a mission in health or energy or you name it, the idea is that you put together not just the scientists, but also the countries and the people. And my idea is that you cannot force, and I think that probably if you tell me what was in Horizon 2020 something that didn't work, I think that didn't work that we thought at the time, because we had no previous experience of that, and that was the way we thought about it, that we could impose social sciences to work with other fields. And so we would have these calls saying, look, we need a social scientist, and we need someone from physics and someone from chemistry. And then people would go to the call, and because they were just obliged to do it, they really would not work together. And we know that. Let's be, I mean, we are among friends. I mean, people just get together, and so I'm a sociologist, I'm someone from physics, you do your part of the call, I do my part, and that is not working together. And I think what we wanted by Horizon Europe was to change that paradigm, that people would want to do it, not because we impose it. And so the idea is that social science would be embedded in every line of the program, as digital will be also embedded somehow in data. And so we see it a little bit the other way around, and we see it as the people really contributing and putting it in a way that people want to do it. So my idea in the calls is to change the way we write the calls to make it something that people know, look, if I have a mission on diabetes or in some kind of disease, I cannot achieve that mission without social sciences. And so if I cannot achieve that mission without social science, I have to use social science, so I have to do it. So I'm not saying do it with social sciences, but I will create missions that will, by definition, only be solved if social sciences are there. So it's a different way of seeing it. But I will be interested to see the colleagues.
Maria, perhaps a comment on this? Take the microphone.
I think there's so many questions out there, and this was an encompassing answer, so I think I won't comment.
Okay. Angela, perhaps a remark on this? Okay. Okay, the next do we have a question on this side? Yes.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, for a very inspiring presentation.
Your name and where you're from?
I'm Ellen Marie Forsberg from Oslo Metropolitan University. I'm the coordinator of a European project on responsible research and innovation in practice. And these days, 22 research conducting and research funding organizations connected to the project are finalizing their RRI implementation action plans all over the world, in Brazil, in China, India, the US, and of course Europe. And they're coming to me and they're saying, okay, we're investing all these resources into making RRI action plans, but what's going to happen? Is this going to be outdated already in Horizon Europe? So I was wondering, what should I tell them when they come to me and ask for the future of RRI in Horizon Europe? Thank you.
Well, I think I'll let Carlos speak first on this, because it is a kind of a...
But I just want to tell you, to your point, if you go into a world of open data and open science, you need more to focus and to invest in responsible research. Because integrity is even more important in an open world. If I have a closed world, I mean, I can impose things. If I go to really open access, open data, then I have to have more enforcement in everything related to responsible research and integrity. And you have to be tougher. And I think that I always said, and sorry that I didn't mention that, when I talked about open access, open data, I think that research integrity is the third leg here that I didn't mention, and thank you for coming with your question, because it allows me just to go a little bit further on that. If you don't change the paradigm where you just have the researcher as the responsible for that integrity, you're not going to change anything. Institutions will also have to be responsible for that. Those plans are extremely important, because without those plans you cannot really have a plan for that responsibility to be ingrained in what people do in their everyday life. So I think that what you're doing will even be more necessary in a future, in a future of open access and open science. So just to reassure you on that, because I think that those plans are extremely important. It seems to people sometimes that, oh no, it's just another plan. But you know, it's a very important plan, because what you see, and you have seen a lot of cases lately in the news, is because in an open world, I mean, you can have fake stuff, you can have fake journals, you can even have fake scientists. So you have to control that in a bigger way and in a much more tougher way. So keep going.
Yeah, Maria and Angela, what do you think about the question of responsible research and scientific integrity?
Right, I'm very glad you're bringing this up. I skipped over it. I graded out on my talk because, like I said, we have a session this afternoon. Carlos, I think funders can go further. So we at EMBO, we mandate research training. Nobody wants, well, I mean, there are criminals out there, but most scientists want to be good. But it is astonishing how even passionately good people aren't aware of many of the things that are included in responsible research. So a group of people developed, quite a long time ago now, 10 years ago, an online training course. It's called Epigeum. It's excellent. It needs updating, but that needs money. We mandate from our postdoctoral fellows and our young investigators, if they want to see even a single penny from EMBO, they have to take that course, unless they can prove that their institution has trained them in a more intensive way. So we mandate it. No money without proof of research integrity training. We go out. So the thing is that many institutions in Europe don't have that. There is no general mandate. There is no general framework. I really think that's a very, very important issue, and all funders should push it. And I will recommend that in the session this afternoon. And again, money has to be provided for that.
Angela, what's your personal experience? Can you give us personal experience, either yourself or as the Marie Curie Association, on this issue of scientific integrity, the issues?
Issues in the Marie Curie Alumni Association is agree with the importance of research integrity, and there are a good opportunity and discourse on this topic inside the association.
Okay, I'd like to ask for the next question on this side. Your name and where you're from?
Yeah, Alexander Gerber, good morning. Professor of Science Communication in Germany. Thank you very much, first of all, for emphasizing to reiterate that social contract and the need for social appropriation of science. I think it links very well also to yesterday's opening with ethical, legal, social implications and all the ethics that were mentioned. Interesting to see that the first question that came up was exactly about the pillar which addressed this in Horizon 2020 and of course in FP7, FP6 and before. Might be coincidental, but who knows. I'm afraid I haven't fully understood the reasoning behind the Commission cutting that pillar, and I'm saying this as someone who's been blessed with running 5 SWOFs projects in parallel at the moment, so I maybe shouldn't be saying that, but I would not sign the petition that is out there at the moment arguing for a continuation of a SWOFs program in Horizon Europe. So I understand, I think, the reasoning behind it, but if you're saying you want to move from multidisciplinarity to interdisciplinarity, what are the specific mechanisms that are meant to ensure that this is actually going to happen? I mean, we earmarked science communication in FP7, that was also not necessarily a big success story. How do we make sure that this is actually a transition, which, if I understand, that's what you want to do?
So, Carlos, on that policy?
I think that first of all, I think that if you look at every line of the budget, we were able to increase those lines of the budget. But it's not just about increasing the budget, and I think that your point is well taken, is how do you change structurally the way you communicate with the people, right? And I think that is a structural change, so it will take a long time. And so you can prepare the ground, and I think that when I say that I want to see in between 5 to 10 billion of this mission-oriented science, that will be the tool for changing the way you communicate. I think that we need to do communication, not just communicating project by project, but communicating by this mission-oriented science, that you get people around the story. And so I know that for scientists sometimes it's difficult because you have your own story, but the story that you have to translate to people is a different one. And that one will be made by these missions, where people understand what you do on the street. And I think that more than tell you about of this project or that line of business and if it's going to increase or decrease, I think that what I want is that we can have an overall change in the way we communicate science. And so if you, first of all, if you use the missions as your major communication tool, I think that will change because you will need to communicate in a different way. There will be, I mean, I cannot accept a mission that will be a mission that people don't understand what you do. For instance, we were talking about the Human Brain Project. If someone, people come to me and say, well, why don't we have a mission on quantum? And I say, but quantum is not a mission. Quantum is a tool to achieve a mission. The Human Brain Project is not a mission, is a tool to achieve some missions of curing diseases. And so I think that my idea is more structural than just having different projects of communication. The second thing that I wanted to tell you was on the innovation side. I think that one of the problems of our communication is fragmentation. And we have so many projects and so many different instruments that people get lost. And so the idea of having a European Innovation Council, of putting everything in one-stop shop, linking that with universities and the ERC, then you have a much cleaner way of communicating. And you need to have people look at Europe and say, we have the European Research Council and the first pillar, then you have the Open Innovation and the European Innovation Council, and then you can have other instruments, but those are the main, and then you have the missions. And so if you look at that, you have the bottom-up, the ERC and the EIC, and of course the Marie Skłodowska-Curie and others, and then you have the top-down, which is the mission. So the missions are top-down, and the rest is bottom-up. That will really help you on the future of communication, I'm sure.
Thank you, Carlos. Would you like to make any comments on this? Okay, perhaps go on to the next question. Is there a question on this side?
Anne Cambon-Thompson, CNRS and University of Toulouse. My question is maybe to Maria first and the whole panel. You talked about peer review quite intensively. And the peer review, when you have interdisciplinarity in articles, and the same is true for different applications and research. And I was wondering how Europe and maybe the world of the journals could actually collaborate to solve this problem. And for the commissaire, that is one question. With this new paradigm, how is going to be organized the peer review of these application and projects?
Maria?
Yeah, I can speak from many angles as a former chair of an ERC selection panel, as from the view of the journals, and then from the view of having to evaluate young people who apply for postdoctoral fellowships, who are much more interdisciplinary in their own thinking than the senior people who judge them. So it is a problem. But I think, I mean, the ERC does it very well. The panel chairs talk to each other. There is, most scientists do not have too much hubris to ask their colleagues from other fields for advice. Journal editors have exactly the function that they find referees from different fields. It can become difficult, but I think, you know, I'm old, so it's a little bit bewildering to me, but as you go down in age, sorry, the younger generations find it quite normal to interact with each other. I mean, my own lab goes from physics and theory all the way to experimental biology. They all talk to each other. I think we shouldn't worry too much. The young people are wonderful in just picking up the diversity and living it. and enriching us. So I think that's my answer. I just want to, while we're back on publishing and peer review, I want to make one thing perfectly clear about what you said. I totally understand that open access is, that the profits have been extortionate. We are willing to give up our profit that our journals make. But we have to give, if we go to free, then we can't run the journals anymore at all. So again, I just want to say, let's protect the peer review that's necessary, and let's find models that do everything that you just asked, and that allow us to keep the high quality.
Yes, Angela, but the fact that you're in a kind of a multidisciplinary area, how does peer review work for you? Who were your peers?
In the multidisciplinary work is the life for researchers, and in particular in the field of social science and the humanities. If the social sciences and humanities can want a life for the future, in my mind, in my opinion.
Carlos, would you like to say anything about this?
No, I thought that Anne didn't have a right to ask questions because she's the host, but she asked the question. So, no, and I think that the ERC is probably one of the greatest examples of how you can really achieve that interdisciplinarity in terms of the panels and the evaluation. I agree with Maria that the new generation is very different, and that new generation will come also to those panels at some point, and so there will be a change. I think we have more a problem in the side of the innovation side, and that we're sure that those European Innovation Council evaluation panels, they take into account that interdisciplinarity. So I think that we kind of have to replicate the model without being replicable, because innovation at that stage is next to the product is very different from fundamental science, but that's what I want to do. So I'll focus more on changing on the innovation side, because the European peer review system that we have, and especially at the ERC level, is today world class. And everywhere I go in the world, people kind of tell us, oh, tell us a little bit more about the ERC and how does it work, because it's wonderful and really works in terms of interdisciplinarity. And so it's more about keeping that and getting more young people on board, because that's important for them and is important for us, because they have, as Maria was saying, a totally different view on interdisciplinarity. They're not afraid of interdisciplinarity, and our generations were afraid of interdisciplinarity. We didn't feel comfortable with that.
Yeah, thank you, Carlos. Another question over here. Your name and where you're from?
Craig Nicholson from Research Europe. Commissioner, you said that you think institutions are still too vertical in the 19th century. So I wondered if you could please kind of give us your idea of a networked 21st century institution. Is it universities without rectors? Is it commission DGs without a director general? An ERC without a president? And how might Horizon Europe move us in that direction?
Okay, well, I'll just let Carlos answer this. Take the microphone so we can hear you, Carlos.
These are really a great question that I could spend hours but I'm going to try to be short. I think that this is one of the biggest questions of politics for the next 10 years, is that, one, we brag about politicians that we need to have and include people, but then we don't know how to manage that. Right? We say we want to be inclusive, so we do meetings with people and we listen to people, but at the end of the day, because the organizations are so vertical, you just do it as you used to do. And people today really want to co-create with you. So what I want to focus on, what are the instruments that I can create in the future to change that paradigm where people really create with you, and not the usual suspects. Because you can always get focus groups with the people that are always the same, and the people that you see, and the people that are around in Brussels, but that's not what I want, and that's not what's needed. So your question is much bigger than science, is a question of, the big question of democracy. And that's why people are far, far away from politicians, because they don't believe anymore. They hear politicians saying that they want to include them, but then they don't feel included at all. And so I think that it's not about saying that you have institutions without a president. You need institutions with a president, but you need flat organizations. You need organizations where the hierarchy doesn't come by your title, but it comes by what you are and the value that you add to the organizations. I think that probably if you think at the new wave of CEOs that are coming into the private sector, you see those examples. I mean, one of the professors that I work very much in the Harvard Business School, and was my professor in 2000, Linda Hill, she studies these matters, and she studied the example of a company like Pixar. And nobody knows who's the CEO of Pixar. If I show you a picture, I mean, it's called Ed Catmull, but he's always behind the scenes. And so the new leader of the future is not a leader that is on the stage. He's a leader that is behind the stage, preparing the stage for his people to do the show. And that's a very different view from leadership from before. Leadership was about you go to the stage, you tell people what to do. But people don't want that anymore. They're tired of listening to you. They want themselves to be the actors. And so the leaders will be people that will be behind. And people will come and say, this guy is a leader because he put me on stage. And so it's a very different way, but you still need and you still want, today you want, like you go to politics and you think like, oh, there's a new president, he's gonna change everything, he's gonna be magic, there'll be more jobs. No, I mean, one man doesn't change anything, but one man can change the stage. And I think that that's what I feel is that we need to change the way we work as politicians. And so, so that's what I mean by that, is that leadership is changing as a whole, and so you need to do that in a different way.
Okay. Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Maria?
Unfortunately, one man can change much for the worse, and you know who I'm talking about.
Okay, next question over here. Your name and where you're from?
Joan Rovira from Barcelona, Spain. So my question is basically for Maria Leptin. It's about the peer review. And my question is, what do you think about open peer review? In my experience as a researcher and recently as an editor of an academic journal, I am very for open peer review. I think it's a way, it's a way to give incentives to peer reviewers because usually you don't pay them, but it's also a fair a way to establish a fair dialogue, which nowadays it's not so. And I have seen now as an editor that you can really, bias the system. If you have, if you want to favor some author, it's easy to manipulate it because it's a black box. Yes. So I think that the institutions should favor and promote open peer review and not only open publishing.
Yes.
So, Maria?
Totally 100% in favor, of course. So there's various levels. Open peer review of publishing the reports by the referees. We introduced that in 2009, I believe, and it's now become more common. Enabling a discussion between the reviewers, absolutely. At grant panels, that happens anyway, so the panel members discuss the applications. At journals, it is now also happening increasingly. Absolutely perfect. Non-anonymous peer review has interesting advantages, but it also has disadvantages because it requires infinite courage of people who may depend for their future career on the people they're reviewing. So there, I think, non-anonymous peer review for papers is very difficult. The ERC, I wish they would keep their panels non-anonymous. I think it is wrong that the panels are anonymous and that only the panel chairs are known. So totally in favor. I wish everybody would do it, and let's promote it further. But it is spreading. Even Nature said they would introduce transparent peer review. That's what we call it. So I'm glad you bring it up. Let's all do it.
Thank you, Maria. Would any of the other panel members wish to say anything about this? No? Next question.
Yeah, my name is my name is Jürgen Knödelseder. I'm working here as astrophysicist in Toulouse, and I'm also chair of the Cherenkov Telescope Array Consortium, which is a big astronomical project which just became landmark on the S3 roadmap. So the S3 roadmap is a very nice tool because it basically says what we in Europe want to do together. But when it comes to implementation, it basically says, well, now countries get your act together. And if you don't, you drop off the nice roadmap. So seeing this process from the inside, it's a very frustrating, time-consuming, and also money-consuming process. So if we say already in Europe what we want to do together, shouldn't there be means also in Europe to do it together, to stay competitive also in the future, where other big countries, they say what they want to do and they just go for it, and we are struggling for a long time to put the act together and then always basically being behind the others.
So large-scale infrastructures. I think this will be the last question unless there's a very, very pressing question from someone in the audience, and then we'll conclude. So please, Carlos, on the question of large-scale infrastructures.
There's a really important question because I think one of the things that failed, and so I'm going to be very direct, is that before we had these kind of separation in between the structural funds and the science funds. So we would be able to fund you on the research infrastructures plans, but then you would go to the countries, and as you said, the countries can just choose not to do it. I mean, and how can I enforce that? One of the things that we changed for the future is really radical, is that we will be able, for the first time in a very easy way, to mix structural funds with horizon funds. And that will have several effects. One is something that we created but was not working yet as I wanted, called the Seal of Excellence, which means that if you have a very good project that comes to Horizon, but it gets a very good ranking, but I don't have any more money to give to that project can go to a country, to the structural funds, and doesn't need another evaluation, will be basically funded at the same rate, and there will be no problems of state aid. So that will be clean, and you can use kind of an automatic way that the structural funds help. The second one is on all those research infrastructures and also on the aeronets, that you would have 30% of Horizon money, and then you have money from the national budgets. Then you can now you can replace that for structural funds money. That will help. So that will really help on your question. That was a question that some countries, they say, look, I have another choices from my budget, so I'm not going to do it. But now the countries can say, okay, I don't have the money, but I can put my structural funds that come from Europe to do it. And this is really profound. So I'm sorry that I got a little bit technical, and this is not for everybody, because some people probably are asking, what is he talking about? But this was one of the major changes. I mean, we have 100 billion euros in the structural funds that are also for innovation and science, but they're not linked to our Horizon funds. And that was really one of the battles that I think we won together with my colleague from the structural funds, and that will help on solving the problem. I don't know if it will solve completely, but it will definitely help.
Thank you very much, Carlos. Would the other panelists like to say anything about this issue? Okay, thank you very much. What I'd like now to ask each of the panelists to say 1 or 2 words as conclusion. So 1 or 2 words, maybe 3. So, Angela?
Well, okay, I'll start, since we're fighting about who does not want to start. I think it's been great to hear the interesting topic and the positive spirit for many of the things that were said, whether it's integrity, whether it's new funding mechanisms, whether it's openness, etc. What strikes me is that there are solutions in place, and for some reason they're not being implemented. And it would be interesting to see what we can do. It's very much what's lacking is the can do and let's do attitude. We heard that from the last intervention, and we've heard it from others, from the hierarchy. So something has to happen for people to do stuff. It's not just money, it's also to overcome other barriers. And I don't know whether you can do anything about that. I don't know who can do anything about that, but that seems to be one of the problems in Europe.
Okay, thank you. Angela, final word?
In conclusion, as Commissioner Moedas highlighted, we have built a global reputation in research and innovation programming. He also added that with Horizon Europe, we are enacting an evolution, not a revolution. This evolution will be fully enacted if the discrepancies between different participating countries in this program, which are still associated geopolitical imbalances, are overcome. This will mean that excellent researchers in many areas of Europe will be able to take part in this program, which aims to help realize Europe's full potential and the dream of unity and democracy. Thus, the name Horizon Europe will speak to our pride, because our union is something we should be infinitely proud of. And the Marie Curie Alumni Association agrees that it is important to build on the success of the past in order to put our best foot forward for the future, because the European Union of Researchers is already a grand reality.
Thank you, Angela. Carlos, a final word?
Very quickly, just to give you some homework before I go. I think that we have a very difficult 6 months ahead of us, that we got to have this amazing proposal of 100 billion euros for science and innovation. But I need your help. I need that every one of you. And politics is about details. Go to your finance ministers. Go to your science ministers. Go to your prime ministers and tell them how important this is. These next 6 months, Europe is about your countries. It's not about the Commission. It's about your countries telling around the table that they agree with this proposal. If they want to increase it, great, but don't touch it. Just help me here, because sometimes we talk about these as already a reality. And this Horizon Europe program is a proposal that depends on you being vocal every day, every hour. Don't take anything for granted. Tell your stories. Get your pressure as high as you can in your politicians in every country in Europe. It's the only way we can get there. And I really need your help on this one. I cannot do it alone. You can do it. A lot of other people in Europe are fighting for different budgets, and I want to see more the scientists on TV and talking to politicians. So before I go, I'll leave you some homework.
Thank you, Carlos. Carlos has invited us to adopt a fighting spirit, to go forward, and we also have heard among the different remarks from the panel the importance of our cultural heritage going forward with Horizon Europe, the importance for the young people.